Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Cremando for YogaUOnline, and I'm super delighted to be here today with Jivana Heyman. Jivana is a yoga teacher, certified yoga therapist, and the founder and director of Accessible Yoga, which many of you will already understand to be an international nonprofit organization dedicated to increasing access to yoga teachings. He's the author of the really popular and wonderful book, Accessible Yoga, Poses and Practices for Everybody. He's the co-owner of the Santa Barbara Yoga Center and an integral yoga minister. Over 25 years of teaching and conducting countless teacher training programs throughout the world, Jivana has specialized in teaching yoga to people with, let's say, other abilities who have, I don't like disabilities, but that's how it's usually described, but I'm going to say other abled people. With an emphasis on community building and social engagement, he dedicates his time to supporting yoga teachers who are working with underserved populations in underserved areas, which makes it a double pleasure to be able to meet you and talk with you, Jivana. Welcome.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks for having me. It's nice to talk to you too. Nice to meet you.
You too. So
yeah, I mean, I just want to jump in about that disability word, because I just want to say, like, people, I think it's up to people to decide. Like, I know people who love that word. So I think it's kind of, you know, part of, you know, this process of, you know, finding your own voice and figuring out where you fit in the world is like, what do you want? How do you want to identify? So some people have just embraced that, and actually in yoga, well, not just in yoga, but in the disability community, there's a kind of a debate going on about that around the use of words like person first language. Do you know about that? Like a person with a disability versus identity first, where you'd say a disabled person. And so there's kind of like a younger generation that's talking about, I'm a disabled person, you know, and identifying that as like part of their cultural identity.
So instead of saying, because the more correct thing was supposed to be, I'm a person who lives with. Right,
person first. That's still, I mean, that's still the most like polite way. It's kind of like if I don't know someone, and that's what the language I would use with them is person first language. But if you get to know someone and they say, well, actually, I like to use my identity first. I like to say, you know, I'm autistic, I'm deaf, I'm blind. You know, a lot of these communities like to say that word, say the word. And there's actually a bit of a movement within the disability community of like, say the word disabled or say the word autistic.
Interesting.
Which is interesting.
As you're talking, it sounds almost like it's an empowering thing.
Yes, exactly.
So I can totally see that. I have a very close relative who just was diagnosed in her 20s with autism and is so relieved because she spent her whole life going, what in the world is wrong with me? And now she's just like screaming to the world, I'm autistic.
Right, exactly.
So I guess to own it, to own what you're, and that's really kind of been the basis of your work. You coined that term, accessible yoga, like 10 years ago or more, probably.
Probably more. I'm getting old. Yeah.
But it's become a standard term. It's definitely a ubiquitous term in the yoga community, and it's grown to mean more than physical. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind talking actually a little bit about your process and how you really came about the need to give that kind of a voice to every person with their practice.
Well, and it's kind of a long story, but let's see if I can summarize. So actually, I was an AIDS activist. I'm a gay man, and I came out during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and all my community was really struggling with HIV and AIDS. So I was practicing yoga for myself, and it just kind of dawned on me that I could share these teachings with my community. And so when I started teaching, that was my intention right away, was to share yoga with people with HIV and AIDS. And then that kind of expanded, and I started working with lots of other people in the disability community. And many of my students just became so, I don't know, like just loved yoga and like really passionate about it and wanted to become teachers. And so actually I started using the word accessible yoga when I I created originally it was a 200-hour training. I think that was in, gosh, I'm so bad with days, maybe 15 years ago. And it was a 200-hour for people with disabilities to become yoga teachers at first. It's kind of like empowering that community, making a training that would lift them up and put them in that position of teacher. And then it kind of grew from there. And then we had an accessible yoga conference that was in 2015, the first one. And that's where we really got to connect with more of a global community of people who were doing this work, people that were kind of working outside of the commercial yoga world. And that's what we're still doing, actually. Yeah.
I know you actually, let's make a little plug for it because I know you have one coming up. You've got an accessible yoga conference. Do you want to just tell us?
We're moving online because of COVID for the first time. It'll be October 9th through 11th. We'll have our first accessible yoga conference online, which I'm very excited about because it's more accessible that way. So we can even reach more people. So I'm very, very excited. We have amazing presenters. It's really good.
Yeah. So what would we see at an accessible?
Yeah, I mean, it's the conference is a little different than other yoga conferences, I think, because there's the education component, but we really focus on networking and community building. So we offer, not just great classes and workshops with a huge array of diverse presenters, but time to meet with people on Zoom calls, but like live Zoom calls, focus on specific areas of interest, like yoga for kids with disabilities or yoga for the blind and low vision community. So like that, like we're trying to connect people who maybe don't work in what we think of as commercial yoga, and they have more niche areas of service, trying to support them in that process.
So you mentioned community building, and I know community building and social engagement and shifting the perception of yoga are an emphasis in your work. Can you talk a little more about what that means and really tying that into how do we shift the greater yoga community to be more about everybody and every mind and every person? I know that's your passion, so.
I think it's happening. What's that?
I said, I know that's your passion, so I'll just sit back and let you talk.
I like to be optimistic sometimes, and say, like, I think it's happened. Like, I feel like there's such a diversity now of teachers out there. And actually, I think, in a way, being forced to move online has kind of helped a little with that, because I think it's made it more of a what do they call it, democratic platform or field. Like, everyone's online now. So I think it kind of allows more teachers an opportunity to have a voice. And that's been amazing to see. But I would just say that for me, it goes back to my activism, which is, at heart, I'm still a disability activist, and I'm passionate about this idea of, of equity and justice. And what I've found in my personal practice is that these ideas are actually at the basis of yoga, that the teachings of yoga really rest on this idea of equity and justice, truthfulness, and non-harm. I mean, that really it's an ethical practice. And I just feel like that's so closely connected with social justice and the kind of awakening that I see happening these days, at least in the US. And sometimes I think yoga has been kind of misunderstood as primarily just a physical practice that's focused on extreme asana. And like, I love asana, but I sometimes think that image, that we've been shown about what yoga is actually a disservice, because it makes people think that yoga is not for them. And really, yoga is for anyone. Anyone who wants it can practice. It's a much more subtle practice. It's actually a spiritual practice, and that's a universal, right? Everyone has that spirit. So it doesn't matter, in the end, it doesn't matter what it looks like on the outside. The practice is an inner experience. So I just feel passionate about that, about connecting yoga and social justice, and also sharing that message that yoga is really there for all of us, and that we can change the way we perceive it to realize it's much more, I don't know, you know what I'm saying, much more universal.
I feel like part of what you're saying, and it because it resonates so much with me and in my work, is empowerment.
Yes.
A theme for me always with my students is who owns their practice.
Mm.
And I always want it to be them.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is that ownership might look different for different people, and it might encompass a lot of other things besides poses.
Yes, exactly. I like that idea of owning your practice. That's really interesting. I think that's a great way to think about it, because even if you look at the relationship in a traditional like studio yoga class where you have the teacher and the student, I'm really very interested in that dynamic, that what goes on in that environment. And, you know, I know these days, usually we're not really in the studio, but we have a very traditional way of thinking about learning. And I think it comes from the way we're, you know, when we're young children at school, and we have the teacher who we look up to, and we kind of bring that same concept into yoga. And we have this tendency to always see the teacher as the one with the power and the knowledge, and the student is without. You know, they're less than. They have no authority in that space. And I think it's actually led to a lot of problems, like a lot of abuse, you know, which is like a whole other conversation, but also on a more subtle level, like, well, an injury. Like, I know for myself, I've been injured in yoga classes that I was doing what I was told to do. You know what I mean? Like and it's not really the teacher's fault, but I think it was my not taking power or control over my own practice, like you said, that led to that, not listening.
I think there's another piece to it too. And I think that what you do in your work, I'll just say it and then I'll see if I'm right. That it really is kind of at the core of what you do, is that so many students, and then, you know, I've been teaching for like 18 years. And certainly, as we all do, I've evolved, but I've always felt like the yoga, I'm a guest. You know, I'm a teacher, I want to give my thing, but that the yoga should fit the person. And that what happens is that I've seen, probably over these years, you know, hundreds of people who say, I went to yoga and it didn't, I was terrible, I didn't do it right. And I want to say, and I usually do say, you did not fail at yoga, the yoga failed you, because it wasn't. This is what I feel kind of like what you're doing with your work is the yoga has to fit the practitioner.
Yeah. Yes, I like that too. That's really interesting way to put it. But I think the challenge with that is that it can be hard in a group setting for the teacher to design a practice that's individualized. And I know that, you know, I'm a yoga therapist too, and I get that idea of individualizing a practice, but that's not always really available to people to go and have private yoga therapy. So I think for me, a lot of it has to do with like going back to the role of the teacher and student and really helping the student find their way. So I think it's shifting the relationship. And as a teacher, we can start to teach better. I mean, to be honest, like to teach better means to like do a better job at imparting the knowledge and the wisdom directly to the students. So they have the choice. They have that agency, I like to say, over their body and over their practice to decide what feels good, what doesn't, what do I need today, what do I not need. And sometimes I think some teachers are amazing at this, but mostly I think we tend to teach like a routine, and it's just like a set sequence. And we're just kind of expecting everyone to follow in line, kind of like school. And I just don't think that's it. I think it's about, you can do all that, but first you really need to give them students the knowledge that yoga is for you, and you need to make it your own, and you need to find your own way. And that's how it becomes part of your life, and I would say how you even can then take it home. Because I think my goal as a teacher would be to have the student become independent of me, and eventually have their home practice and not come, you know, but I don't know if that's how we work in our system. We kind of want the students just keep coming back.
I think it does go back to that hierarchy you were talking about. And 3 words I would love to see eliminated from the yoga community are beginner, intermediate, and advanced.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
as soon as you set up levels, what I talk about sometimes in my classes, this morning I'm serving up a vinyasa buffet,
Uh-huh.
and this is what's on the table.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Fill up your, fill up your
Yeah.
mat with what is useful to you
Yeah.
today, and offering options. But when you go into that idea that there's some place where you're going to get to advanced and someone's going to come out and give you a sticker that,
I know.
that you
It's
hit
a problem. It's a big problem. Actually, I often talk about it in relationship to educating kids with disabilities, because in the education system, at least in the US, there used to be that kids with disabilities were segregated into separate classrooms, and that's changed mostly. I mean, it's still not always happening, but there's a lot of research that shows that kids do better in integrated classrooms where there's a mixture of ability there. And I think that actually is true in yoga too. And so in my trainings, I often talk about teachers need to learn the skills to teach many levels at the same time, including people with disabilities. So I often give teachers skills like working in a chair and on the mat simultaneously, and how you can make that an integrated experience where everyone feels like they're part of that.
right.
You know, sometimes when you're teaching, it's like, okay, if you're on the mat, you're going to do this pose, or you can do this modification in a chair, as if it's like less than, and that drives me crazy, because
it's like sending people to the kids' table.
yes. Yes.
Go eat at the kids' table. You're not ready for the adult table.
No.
And in fact, I think you can pack a wallop in a chair.
Of course, because yoga is an internal experience. It's about what's happening, not just mentally, but I mean, not just physically, but mentally too. So you could actually, I teach bed yoga. I teach yoga. I have people just imagining the poses in their mind, which is such an amazing way to practice, because it's not just physical movement. It's about the relationship that you have with the body and the mind, and actually using the body and mind to go deeper, to connect with some deeper sense of ourself. And that's there no matter what condition the body's in or what ability the body has. I always laugh, and I ask teachers, or I ask anyone who's listening to me, say you're an advanced practitioner and you do all these fancy poses. What happens if you get into an accident? What happens as you get older? Like my grandmother taught me yoga. She was in her, actually starting probably in her 60s, all the way through her 80s, she was practicing. And from when I was a very small child, she would practice every day. And I remember when she was in her 80s and she had broken her hip, actually. She fell and then she couldn't practice the same way. And I just remember really thinking about it, that I knew her, of course, so well, and I knew what an amazing yoga practitioner she was. And so even though she couldn't do those same movements, that didn't change her depth of experience and wisdom and her yoginess. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not taken away when you lose the physical ability. So I think obviously that's not how it comes either, right? Yoga is something more.
It seems like you're touching on interoception. Our ability to feel the internal states in the body. How does that come into your work? Because as you're talking about working with people on a bed or working with it, how does one almost tap into that inner sensation, no matter where they're coming from?
Yeah, I think that's key actually to asana, is to learn how to notice what's happening in the body and to really feel into it. And I think to me, that's an advanced practice. An advanced practice is to increase our subtle awareness of what's happening, not to be able to do increasingly physically challenging poses, but to become more sensitive. And sensitivity is funny, because sensitivity sometimes, it can be painful even sometimes to notice more, to sense more. And I don't think we've talked about that enough in yoga. I think becoming more aware of sensation, noticing what's happening with the breath while I'm doing this movement, the connection between them. These are really the more subtle things that go on. What is my mind going when I'm practicing? Like, I always think it's amazing to look at how we can move energy with the mind. So say you can bring your awareness to like your right big toe, and all of a sudden it's like you have more energy going there, like it has more sensation. So there's definitely a relationship between interoception and focus and awareness. So I guess in a roundabout way, I'm saying it's not just about increasing sensation, but it's also about learning how to use your mind in your practice. And that focus is the key, right?
That
Because
sounds
that's
like, you're talking about a much more, it's, I don't, I don't love this word, but embodied practice. The reason I don't like it is because it sounds physical, but that's not what you're talking about. You're really talking about a whole body practice that encompasses awareness and mind and focus and breath and all of those things.
Exactly. Because sometimes I ask people, like, what's the difference between yoga and exercise? So say you're doing, especially when you modify a practice, like I often do, like, or adapt a practice, say like a chair yoga class versus a chair exercise class. And it's like, what's the difference there? And what's the difference is that inner awareness. Like that's what makes it yoga. Because on the surface, the practice, the physical movements might actually be the same in an exercise class as a yoga class. But what makes it yoga is this inner attention, this inner focus. And I think that's what we need to be talking about more and teaching about more, because that's the yoga piece. It's not this shape. It's not the shape of Trikonasana that makes it yoga. It's the inner sensing and the focusing that makes it yoga.
And once you've done the inner sensing and the focusing, then you can also make some choices about what you see. Because you do see people year after year. I don't know if you see this, but as a teacher, I see people year after year of the same samskaras, have the same postural habits that resist anything like going in there and saying, well, but why are you doing that? But why can't you do Shavasana after all these, why can't you,
It's so true. I mean, that is exactly the yoga the other word that comes to me is svadhyaya, which is that inner reflection from the Yoga Sutras. It's really the way we practice is by reflecting on what's going on inside. Why, like you just said, that's such a great question. Like, well, why not? And there's usually not time in a yoga class to ask that of individual students, but I think it's empowering for the students to know that's the way in. That the way in to get deeper in your practice is to really ask yourself, wait, what am I feeling here and why? And I know for myself, like often it's emotional stuff. Like I think some scars is a good word, but I also feel like it can just be, the stuff that we've held, like grief or anger or whatever, emotions that we haven't really processed. These days, for example, there's so much grief and change and stress. And I think that I feel it in my body. And so that's what I do. Like I try and spend time really using my practice to free those feelings and process them more, which I think is a great gift of yoga. Processing stuff rather than just letting it get stagnant in my body.
And sometimes I think when you're doing that subtle awareness thing, the processing is happening and you don't, like they say, you don't have to be present to win. Like the processing is the process.
You're right. It's true. You just do the poses. All right. It's not like there's this other thing. You don't have to go and sit on the couch for your analysis. I mean, that can be good too. But just the movement itself and the focus and the breath, just bringing awareness to it and seeing where you're maybe avoiding stuff or not, or how, just sensing, oh, this is uncomfortable. Why am I feeling pain here? Why is this not, asking yourself questions, that's it.
And I think also what you're talking about really when you're doing that subtle thing is to see under layer, that how you've layered things to tell yourself a story. And
yes,
you can get on the mat and get some raw honesty if you're up for it,
Yeah, actually, I think in my book, I talk about the asana. No, what do I say? It's like the body's it's like an archaeological dig, and asana is our shovel. Asana is the tool that we use to, exactly like you said, to like dig down to those layers that are kind of hidden, to reveal what's there. What is the truth for us?
So you are doing that. I just want to go back to the accessible thing because I think it's just so key. You're doing that with people at every level, at every ability level, at all kinds of ages, at all kinds of circumstances. What do you notice about that process of, I'm going to say it this way because I think you've said it this way, finding your inner teacher?
Yeah, actually, like I love what you said earlier too. I think it's like the yoga does it itself. So I think it's not, it's not like we have to do anything else. We just need to go back to this amazing practice we have. Remember maybe some of the fundamental purposes of it. This kind of fundamental purpose of yoga is understanding the nature of the mind, actually, and to understand a relationship between the mind and the body. And if we keep that, and actually I would say beyond that, to connect with an inner sense of self, whether that's spirit or whatever word you like to use, that's really what yoga is about. It's about working with the mind so we can connect with something deeper. To me, that process is so personal that it's not someone else can't do that for you. So it's really about each of us has to find our own way through. And an external teacher can help to some extent, but actually there is the inner teacher. Actually, in the yoga tradition, even there's like the inner guru, the Satguru, which is basically like your inner voice, your intuition, the wisdom mind that you have in yourself. So I think the more we can connect to that, the more effective our practice will be. And so my work is really just saying that simply yoga is for everyone. Also remember what yoga is. That's really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And because yoga is not just this physical exercise, yoga is a subtle turning inward. Anyone has a capacity for that. Anyone who's interested has a capacity to connect with that place inside themselves.
And how big is I'm sure you've probably seen this meme. They've used it for a lot of things, but it's an iceberg, and the tip of the iceberg, this is asana, and here's yoga. Just talk about the role of asana, because I'm imagining that you've worked with people for whom asana is a very limited proposition. What is the role of the physical? What is the importance of asana?
Well, it's funny, like I agree. I've been schooled by some of my students basically who, maybe didn't have ability to move their body. I mean, I've had students who had no movement at all, and yet kind of blew my mind with their ability to turn inward and connect and do yoga. So I definitely have learned from that process, watching people respond to things in ways that I just don't even know if I could handle. It's really taught me so much. And yet I know that asana is like an incredible tool. I think the role of asana is that, a lot of times spiritual practice is very much a kind of intellectual pursuit, where I don't know, like a lot of religion uses a lot of study and talking and even prayer, which is still kind of intellectual. And yoga and some other indigenous practices like yoga actually use the body in a spiritual way. It's actually embodied, back to that word. Yoga is an embodied spiritual practice. And I think that's where the asana comes in, and why it's so popular and why it's so effective is that it's actually using the body towards your spiritual awareness and awakening. And that's amazing. But I think we have to be very thoughtful in the way we do it, and just continue to go back to the why, the purpose, you know what I mean? And not just get lost in the fun. I mean, fun is good too, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can get carried away.
Fun is good, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's fun to just get on the mat and do stuff.
Yeah,
I got that. But that's in the wholeness of life. Sometimes it's fun to just have some fun.
Exactly.
But there is a reason I think that yoga grabs us when it truly grabs us.
Yeah, I mean, it's magical, really.
Yeah.
It is. It's magical. I have another analogy. I don't know if it's an analogy, but I like to think about how the feeling I get after I do yoga, and how my mind is more present, and I feel more, usually more calm. And I was thinking about how there's other things in my life that bring that feeling. Like, and I think everyone has that. Everyone has some activity that they enjoy. Like I love to garden. I love to go for walks. And I know that those activities usually bring that experience. But what I realized is that yoga is literally designed to cultivate that experience. So it actually, yoga is about cultivating that experience of being in present, like present moment awareness, at peace between the body, breath, and mind, having them all connected and working in flow, like being in the flow. It's kind of like a being not so much caught in the past and the future. You know what I'm talking about? That moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I love about yoga is like, I know that it's effective. It's an effective way to have that experience that I'm always seeking. If that makes sense.
A beautiful thought. Now you are teaching a course for us coming up. And
I know, my first one. I'm excited.
I know, we're so excited to have you. But the topic is the yoga of empowerment, finding your inner teacher.
Surprise, surprise. I know,
yeah.
right?
Well, tell it. What will you be covering? Will you be covering stuff like this?
Yeah, I like this topic because this is kind of a theme of my work and I've never really talked about it directly before in this way. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to do that, to like spend the time just talking about this process of finding our inner voice, finding that inner teacher, becoming empowered. I think it's like an underlying theme of my work that I haven't spoken to directly. I think most people identify my work with adapting poses or social justice, and that's all true too, but I really like this topic. I'm really excited, and I'm trying to create a course that is for students, practitioners, and teachers also, because I think it's about both. It's about students looking at their role. What is our role as practitioners of yoga? You know, and how can we cultivate that that inner voice, that inner teacher? And also as teachers, how can we support our students in doing that? How can we guide them in a way that's not you know, limiting, that will actually empower them, give them agency over their body? And some of that is social justice work, I have to admit. Like I do want to bring in a little bit of that awareness of the cultural context for teaching yoga right now. But another piece of it is that, yeah, just becoming more creative in our practice and more sensitive to what we're doing.
Well, it sounds exciting.
I'm excited.
Are you excited?
I am.
All right, then the two of us will be there.
Okay. I am excited because, like I said, I think I haven't been able to express this part of my work that clearly before, and I really feel like this is the heart of what I'm trying to do. I'm not just saying, oh, you can adapt yoga for everyone, but I'm trying to say, like, everyone has that source within them.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That source of peace or joy or whatever it is that exists within us. And yoga is an amazing practice that we could all benefit from.
Yeah, when people think of accessible yoga, they're thinking about, I'm on a chair, I have a block, blah, blah, blah. And that's all something, but I think what you're talking about is that really explodes the potential for the whole experience of yoga.
Yeah, thank you. Because I'd say yoga is accessible by nature, actually. Like the essence of yoga is already there for everyone. So it's not like we have to change it. In fact, I say accessible yoga is more like accessing the truth of yoga, not changing it, right? Just trying to get back to that, you know.
Sounds awesome. I am looking forward to your course, and this has been delightful. And thank you so much for taking some time to talk to me.
Thank you. Thanks for asking great questions. It was fun meeting you and talking to you too.
Yeah, you too. All right. Well, we'll see you all in class. Watch for Jivana. He's coming up.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.